The scream did not come from fear alone. It came from truth being exposed too suddenly. It tore through the night like thunder without rain, waking chickens from their sleep and forcing elders to sit upright on their raffia mats. Somewhere beyond the clustered mud houses, where the earth sloped toward forbidden land, a voice cried out a name that was never meant to be spoken aloud. Those who heard it felt their chests tighten, for that name carried shame, betrayal, and a promise broken long ago. At the edge of the land stood a garden that no one tended, yet it never withered. Moonlight rested heavily on its leaves, making them glisten as if wet with secrets. Children were warned never to wander near it, lovers never to swear oaths beside it, and liars never to step into its soil. Yet on that night, someone had entered the garden, and the garden had answered. Nnamdi had always been known as a quiet man, the kind whose thoughts were deeper than his words. He farmed diligently, greeted elders respectfully, and kept his eyes low whenever matters of conflict arose. But silence, like water, could hide dangerous depths, and some said Nnamdi's calmness felt too carefully practiced. He lived close to the boundary where the land thinned and strange stories thickened, a place most people avoided unless duty dragged them there. On the morning after the scream, Nnamdi stood before the garden, his feet refusing to cross its invisible threshold. The leaves trembled, though there was no wind, and the soil seemed darker than usual, as if it had swallowed something it would soon return. Nnamdi wiped sweat from his brow, not from heat, but from the weight of memories he had buried years ago, believing the earth would keep them quiet forever. The elders often said the garden was older than the oldest ancestor whose name still survived on the lips of the living. It was said to have grown from the tears of Allah, the earth goddess herself, after humans chose deceit over honesty. Every plant within it grew without seeds, fed by truths people tried to hide, and watered by lies whispered in darkness. Anyone who entered with a clean heart left untouched. Anyone who carried deceit left changed. Many had tested the garden unknowingly. A hunter once entered boasting of bravery, only to run out screaming, confessing he had stolen another man's kill. A woman who claimed faithfulness emerged kneeling, begging forgiveness for a child conceived in secrecy. The garden did not kill, but it stripped souls bare, and that was a fate many feared more than death. Adazeze had sworn by her chi that she would never return to the garden, yet grief has a way of dragging people back to forbidden places. Her husband, Obina, had died suddenly, collapsing under a palm tree with no sickness known to the Dibia. Whispers followed his burial like stubborn flies, and many eyes turned toward Adazeze with questions she pretended not to see. That night, as she knelt by her hearth, the same whisper that had split the darkness returned, calling her name softly but insistently. Her hands shook as she remembered a promise made in youth, a vow exchanged beneath a moon that looked just like this one. She knew then that the garden had begun to stir again, and it would not stop until the truth stood naked before everyone. Elder Okoli, whose beard touched his chest and whose eyes had seen too many seasons, struck his staff against the ground when the matter was brought before the council. He warned that when the garden awakened, it was not satisfied with half-truths or clever excuses. It demanded full confession, and it would expose not only the guilty, but also those who benefited from silence. He reminded them of a time long past when the garden swallowed an entire lineage because they chose pride over honesty. Mothers had turned against daughters, brothers against brothers, and the land itself had refused their crops. Truth is like palm oil, he said gravely. No matter how carefully you hide it, it will always stain. Sleep avoided Nnamdi, as though it feared what his dreams might reveal. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the garden's leaves parting, heard the soil breathing, felt roots curling around his ankles like accusing fingers. He rose before dawn, pacing his compound while his wife watched silently, sensing the storm gathering behind his eyes. There were things Nnamdi had never told anyone, not his wife, not his chi, not even himself fully. Years ago, ambition had whispered louder than conscience, and he had listened. The garden had seen it all, and now it was calling him back, demanding payment with interest. It was little Chibuzo who crossed the garden's boundary first, chasing a lizard without understanding where his feet carried him. His laughter echoed briefly before stopping abruptly, replaced by a deep, unsettling silence. When he emerged moments later, his face looked older, as though he had aged many seasons in a breath. He walked straight to his mother and spoke words that froze her blood. He named his true father, a man long buried, and asked why lies had been fed to him like food since birth. The garden had spoken through a child, and fear spread faster than Hamatan fire. Soon, people avoided each other's eyes, afraid that a single look might unravel carefully woven stories. Some tried to leave the land, but their legs grew heavy near the path, forcing them back as if the earth itself rejected escape. The garden's power was no longer quiet. It pulsed through the community like a beating drum. Men confessed thefts committed decades earlier. Women admitted betrayals that reshaped family lines. Even the elders were not spared, as secret once justified as necessary evils crawled into daylight. With every confession, the garden grew greener, its leaves wider, its roots deeper. Adazeze could no longer pretend strength when the truth pressed against her ribs. She wrapped her wrapper tightly and walked toward the garden as the sun dipped low, each step heavier than the last. She remembered her husband's smile, the way guilt had lived quietly between them, like an uninvited guest they both ignored. When she stepped inside, the garden welcomed her with silence so loud it hurt. The earth shifted, and her voice poured out everything she had hidden. The child conceived before marriage, the lie Obinna had agreed to carry, and the price he paid with his life. When she emerged, her knees buckled, but her eyes were clear for a long time in years. The Dibia was summoned, his cowries trembling as they fell. He revealed that Obinna had not died of sickness or accident, but of spiritual imbalance caused by carrying another man's truth as his own. The garden had taken what was old, not out of cruelty, but to restore balance. Grief turned into understanding, and understanding into anger for some. The community wrestled with the realization that silence could be as deadly as wrongdoing. The garden had not killed Obinna, their choices had. At last, Nnamdi stood before the elders, his shoulders heavy with what he carried. He admitted to stealing land documents years earlier, altering boundaries so slowly and cleverly that no one noticed. Families had fought, blood had been shed, all rooted in his quiet deception. When he entered the garden, the ground split slightly beneath his feet, not to swallow him, but to remind him how close he had come. He confessed fully, naming names, returning stolen ground, and accepting whatever judgment awaited him. The garden released him, but the people had yet to decide his fate. Rather than death, the elders chose restoration, guided by the lessons the garden had forced upon them. Nnamdi was stripped of titles, made to work the lands he had stolen, and tasked with repairing the families he had broken. Shame became his teacher, and humility his punishment. This decision shocked many, but Elder Okori reminded them that truth's purpose was healing, not endless destruction. When truth comes, it breaks bones first, then sets them properly. As confessions slowed, the garden's leaves nursed their restless movement. The soil lightened and the air around it softened. Children once again played nearby, though none crossed its boundary without respect. It had taken what it needed. Honesty returned to the land. Crops grew fuller that season and sickness reduced. People spoke more carefully, knowing words had weight. The garden remained, not as a threat, but as a reminder. Yet one truth remained buried, known only to the garden and the earth beneath it. A secret that involved Elder Okori himself, hidden so deeply that even he had convinced himself it no longer existed. The garden did not stir, but some nights its leaves rustled softly, as if waiting. The elders noticed Okori's restlessness, the way he avoided the garden path now. Truth, once awakened, never truly sleeps.
Elder Okori dreamt of roots wrapping around his staff, pulling him gently but firmly toward the garden. He woke drenched in sweat, knowing his time had come. Leadership had not immuned him, it had only delayed his reckoning. At dawn, he walked alone into the garden, leaning heavily on his staff, ready to lay down the final burden he had carried since youth. He confessed to condemning an innocent man decades earlier to protect the peace of the land. That man had died nameless, his family scattered. The garden listened and the earth trembled slightly, not in anger but recognition. When Okori emerged, he looked smaller but lighter. The people listened in stunned silence as he spoke publicly, undoing a lie that had shaped generations. The innocent man's name was restored, his descendants called home, and his land returned. Tears flowed freely, not of fear, but of release. The garden had completed its work. Songs were sung that night, not in celebration of pain, but of truth reclaimed. Years passed, and the story of the garden became a tale told by moonlight. Children listened wide-eyed as elders warned them lies grow roots and truth always finds water. The garden remained, silent, watching, knowing that whenever truth was buried too deeply, it would be called upon once more.